Hello and welcome to revision tips for SIPS Level 6 Professional Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 7, Commercial Data Management, and its Learning Outcome 2, which is to understand data integrity and its impact on procurement and supply. So many organisations in the world now use data every day and would struggle to continue operating should access to that data be disrupted. And how data is managed presents many risks to an organisation. Not only must the data be correct and complete, but it also must be kept secure. And much of the data an organisation uses is about people. How this data is used and shared has triggered debate throughout the world. Many countries now have laws in place to regulate and protect the use of personal data. Arguably, the most rigid form that of regulations in the European Union under the General Data Protection Regulations. So data integrity means that data is accurate and complete. The integrity of data fields can be affected by commission, so the data is created that doesn't actually exist, omission, which is data that is deleted to create an impression that it never existed, and manipulation, which is data that's changed from its original value or form. So organisations need to make sure that the data they hold has integrity because they use it to inform all the decisions they make. So an organisation needs to put in place a quality management measure to prevent commission, omission or manipulation of data at all the stages of the data lifecycle. And that starts with acquisition, use, reporting and storing. So quality assurance policies set the framework for the checks and measures required to safeguard the integrity of data. And quality control can then be used to carry out checks that provide reassurance that integrity is being maintained at all points of the data life cycle. So for example, the L6M7 checks, which state that data should always be A, attributable, so it's clear who or what was captured and what it relates to. Then L for legible, easy to understand. C for contemporaneous, recorded at the time it occurred. O for original, preserved in its original form, and A for accurate, which is free from errors. And scripts can be set up on a regular basis to detect any issues. Now, when an organisation puts policies in place to ensure data integrity or acts to reduce risk and monitoring the effectiveness of the measure it takes, this is known as data governance, which is the policies that are applied to acquire, process, report and store data. And it applies at all levels of an organisation, be it strategic or operational. And the integrity of the data can be preserved by using the policies that form part of the governance process to drive the behaviour of the people and the suppliers that are going to use it. So the policies that support governance data include rules and procedures relating to when and how data should be used, the use of third-party data, how data integrity will be ensured, and how data risks will be managed. The data security means the protective digital privacy measures that are put in place to ensure that only authorised people have access to the data. Examples of threats to security of data held on computers or servers or the cloud include data being corrupted by a computer virus, or being deleted or amended by a hacker, or being lost from servers due to a natural disaster. So some of the examples of measures that could be put in place by organisations to keep data secure include creating a backup system, using passwords to restrict access to data, encrypting data so it doesn't make sense to unauthorised people who try to access or use it, and putting steps in place to safeguard IT systems against the viruses. So the security measures that can be put in place to safeguard unauthorised access include logging off, so people should be asked to log off from systems when they're not using them. An IT system can often make this happen after a period of time. Switching off, PCs and computers should be switched off when they're not in use. Write protected, devices that are used to store data that can be saved can be set up to avoid accidental deletion by making them write protected. And finally, encryption. Encryption is a way of changing the data, and that can be used to code data so that it doesn't make sense to anyone who tries to access it. Now, the requirement for data integrity and confidentiality is regulated by governments throughout the world. So to understand how and why these legal requirements have been put in place, it's important to understand how they've been developed. The concept of privacy is at the heart of the data protection law. But privacy relates to personal data that is not directly shared with an organisation by an individual. And while not provided directly by the individual, this personal data is, however, collated, analysed, and can be used by organisations in many ways. So an example of this is the sort of type of personal data that's collected on social media platforms about a person's preference or friends. So laws and regulations throughout the world have put in place to encourage responsible data protection handling. But to understand data protection and privacy laws, it's useful to see the history of these measures. So we can understand these early data concepts and the electronic age before we go on to the advent of general data protections. So the early data concepts go back to the 1890s, when the concept of privacy began. And you can see the timeline on the left-hand side, which starts from 1890 with Warren and Brandeis, all the way through to 1967, when the US had their Freedom of Information Act. And then the electronic age, the next era of privacy laws, began alongside the development of computer processing power. In this stage, data could be easily and inexpensively stored in digital form. The development means that a range of data that organisations held about people also increased, which include information about people concerning their health and personal finances, and it focused on regulations. So this is on the bottom right-hand side. It started in 1980 with the OECD guidelines, all the way up to 1993, which was the PC Brown case in the UK. It's worth having a look at these if you're not familiar with these case laws. But in the EU member states, the convention became part of the law through specific legislation. In the UK, this is known as the UK Data Protection Act. There may have been 3 UK Data Protection Act treaties that have been approved. One in 1983, the census case in Germany, established the right of information self-determination, which was the right of an individual to determine when and what information about their private life can be communicated to others. As the use of technology continued to develop in the 1990s, governments in Europe recognised that Treaty 108 needed to be updated, and this led to the directive, as shown on the screen. It's the culmination in the General Data Protection Regulations, started back in 1995 with the EU Data Protection and ended up in 2016 with GDPR. And there are lots of rights to GDPR. So organisations now have to have a clearer steer from regulators as to what's expected from them in terms of responsible data handling. And the EU Data Protection Directive includes the responsible data handling in terms of processing, sensitive personal data, manual data, relevant filing systems, and consent. The actions of an organisation need to be taken in relation to these terms. The directive was particularly relevant due to the growth and use of social media platforms. The 3 areas the directive covered was data terminals, IP addresses, and the security of data held by organisations. But the General Data Protection Regulations 2016 is the regulations that were, I suppose it builds on ones that were already in place, because I think we had the Data Protection Act previous to that. And what it's done is it's harmonised data privacy laws to give greater protection and rights to individuals. It came into force in May 2018. It applies to all companies and organisations that are established in the EU. And it applies to all organisations, even if data processing takes place outside of the EU. There are 8 basic rights for individuals included in GDPR. The first one is to do with access. Individuals can request access to their personal data and ask how it's being used after it's been gathered. And the organisation must provide this free of charge. They have the right to be forgotten. If they no longer have a relationship with their organisation, they can ask for their data to be deleted, and individuals can withdraw their consent for their personal data being used. We've got data portability. Individuals have the right to transfer their data from one service provider to another. And an organisation must ensure data is available for transfer in an easy-to-use format. Be informed. Individuals must opt in for their data to be gathered and must give consent rather than an organisation assuming it has given consent, which is sometimes known as implied consent. They have the right to have their information corrected. So you can require an organisation to update their data if it's out of date, incomplete or incorrect. They have the right to restrict the processing, which means that individuals can request that their data is not used by an organisation for processing. They also have the right to object. So an individual can stop the process of their data for direct marketing, but the organisation must clearly publicise the right to object to individuals. And finally, they've got the right to be notified. The individual has the right to be informed of a data breach within 72 hours of an organisation concerned becoming aware that the data is no longer secure. So an organisation can protect confidential information using non-disclosure agreements. And that's a legally binding agreement between 2 or more parties to keep information that has been shared between them confidential under the terms agreed. This can apply to trade secrets as well as other information the organisation holds. And there are 2 types. You've either got a one-way one, where you're using it when one party discloses information to the other, or a mutual one, where 2 or more parties disclose information to each other. But it clarifies what information is covered and how long it will be in force. But it also covers what remedies might be available if there's a breach. So here's some of the types of information that would be protected using an NDA as part of a contract with a supplier. The proprietary specification. If the organisation has a specification for goods or services that means it has an advantage over its competitors, disclosure of the details would be detrimental to their business. Observing methods or processes. A supplier might be privy to confidential information about how an organisation's products is manufactured. That could be following a site visit or to carry out work. So this may also apply to instances where a service is provided. So an NDA may be required in this instance to keep what is heard and seen confidential. The next will be collaborating to create something new. So an organisation may be working with a supplier to develop a new product or service. And an NDA would ensure that neither party discloses details until the new initiative is launched. And finally, support from consultants. It will be important to ensure that a supplier who provides consultancy support is clear what information or finding from their work should be kept confidential. The NDA would provide that clarification. So it's a useful tool in safeguarding confidentiality. And as technology has developed, privacy has also become an issue where legal measures are required. Now, intellectual property rights belongs to the body who created it, which can be a person, an organisation, or more than one person or organisations. It's an intangible asset which can be bought and sold, and contracts will state who the intellectual property that is created under the contract belongs to. It can be included as part of a contract of a supplier for a design of a building, a specification for a service, or new software, for example. And there are 4 forms of legal protection that can be used to safeguard intellectual property, which includes a patent, which is used to establish the rights for one organisation to exclude other organisations from making a product for a specified period of years. Once it ends, any organisation can copy and use the detail in the patent. So it usually applies when a new product is invented and it's granted by a government body. But it can also cover how the product works, what it does, what results the product achieves, what the product is made of, and how the product is made. The next one is a trademark, which is a word, logo, symbol, sound. Think about the Intel sound, or actions that are closely related to a particular brand or product. And registering a trademark means other organisations cannot use it on their own goods and services. And misuse of trademark can be stopped by taking legal action. Infringement of a trademark by a supplier may mean the buying organisation is also liable, and this risk can be managed by including an indemnity clause in the contract. Then you've got copyright. Safeguards the intellectual property of original creative work developed by a person or an organisation, such as writing or music or theatre or film, visual arts, architecture, or even computer games. So this should be automatic, there's no formal registration process required, and it prevents other people or organisations from making copies or publishing it in a way, in a physical or digital format, or make it available to the public in some way, like performing or broadcasting. And then trade secrets. Any confidential information that an organisation has that is related to the product or service it produces. And that can include recipes, like the recipe of a Coca-Cola or the formula of a WD-40 spray. But it also applies to business methods and marketing strategies. So you're protected for an unlimited period of time without having to undertake a formal process of registering the trade secret of a government body. And legal action relating to trade secrets is usually taken against employees or former employees who have disclosed information they have a contractual obligation to keep confidential. Now, information assurance is the process of managing risks relating to data that is held about individuals and organisations. It covers the protection of data that is held as paper records, as well as records stored on IT systems. Information assurance focuses on 5 aspects. You've got the availability, integrity, authentication, confidentiality, and non-repudiation. So data needs to be available at all times in order to aid data-enabled business models. And there are measures that an organisation can put in place to ensure access to data is maintained. Ensuring the integrity of data, the data remains intact and uncompromised, and it requires a range of control measures to be put in place. Authentication methods will be things like usernames and passwords, or fingerprints and facial recognition. And this seeks to reduce risk by ensuring only the authorised people are able to access data, to reduce the risk of data being stolen, amended, or deleted. And then data confidentiality means making sure access to data is managed effectively to reduce the risks relating to disclosure. There are legal implications involved in this. And non-repudiation proves who has carried out the action involved in data sets. It's usually in the form of a log that details when and by whom an action has taken place. And digital signatures are an effective way of putting in place authentication, integrity, and non-repudiation methods. Data-enabled business model means an organisation uses data as an integral part of the product or service it provides to its customers. And some types of data-enabled business models will include third-party data, data provided by an organisation to help the decisions that they make, predominantly used for marketing purposes. Targeted advertising, used by social network platforms to make money by identifying customers with characteristics that match the selling organisation's requirements. predictive analytics, which is used to forecast or to analyse or clarify data and facilitate machine learning or map the relationship between variables in data, which is known as regression analysis. And data-informed recommendations, which is used by online marketplaces like Amazon and eBay, who make informed decisions and recommendations to individuals based on their own data and data from other customers. Enhanced data products or smart products like watches or thermostats, they're used to deliver improved functionality and capability. And new data-driven services are used to determine dynamic prices that can change the response to the data that is collected and the predictions about its customers' demand. Now, during the sourcing process, the procurement and supply team should identify whether the supplier uses a data-enabled business model, as this can bring significant advantages. And when considering the impact of data-driven business models, there are a number of steps procurement and supply professionals can take to ensure the risks are identified at an early stage. So for sourcing, you've got your pre-qualification checks. The supplier is asked to detail the checks it carries out to ensure integrity of the data it uses. At contract award, we have the evidence of measures like asking suppliers for evidence of checks relating to their integrity of data before the contract is awarded. And contract management looks for the confirmation of arrangements, evidencing that they've actually carried out the work within the timescales. So when the requirement is first identified and a sourcing process is required, the procurement and supply team should consider whether the supplier uses a data-enabled model. If this is the case, the information and assurances sought during the process will take this into account. Now, making sure data is available when and where it is needed is important, whether an organisation uses data at the customer interface or to ensure its back office function works. The risks of disruption to an organisation's operating a data-enabled business model is quite significant, but the process of making sure an organisation manages risks relating to its data availability is known as data resilience. And that's the ability of a source of data to recover quickly from any disruption. So digital data can be accessed by many sources. It may be stored on a server or available over a network. Accessing data in the cloud is done using an internet connection, but data disruption can occur when equipment fails or a power supply is interrupted, or when a weakness in the software arises. So there are a number of measures that an organisation can put in place to protect itself, and to do this in a planned and effective way, the organisation uses data resilience strategies, which are plans to ensure that an organisation's data can recover quickly from any disruption. So we're going to look firstly at impact awareness. At this awareness stage of an organisation, what they'll do is a business impact assessment, and that will establish the data that an organisation uses for businesses as usual. A process sometimes called a mapping exercise. That will involve identifying where the data originates, what systems it's held on, and whether the data is used to transfer to other systems, and what the current capability is to recover the data and the systems. And once the data used and sources are known, the impact of disruption on the business can be identified, like loss of sales, customer dissatisfaction, or delays to the product or service, costs with the recovery, fines or regulatory penalties, even contractual penalties or delays for a new product or service development. The second is to identify risk. The business will identify potential risks from data disruption, and you'll look at the likelihood that that disruption will occur. and that will help you to develop a process of data resilience strategy. Assessing the likelihood involves considering when and why a disruption will occur. There are a number of different types of risks where an organisation can use this to consider the likelihood that data disruption will occur, such as physical damage to premises, or being unable to access premises, equipment or machinery failure or malfunction, or a supply chain issue. It could even be interruption to supply or power, water or fuel, or an ICT failure, or just a workforce issue in general. Once the risks have been identified, developing and implementing control measures is the next step. So when the impact and likelihood of data disruption is identified, an organisation can implement a risk control measure to avoid these risks and protect against disruption. And the control measures could be eliminate, which is to kind of avoid the risk, reduce or mitigate the risk, or even transfer the risk to another party. But if you decide to accept the risk, this might be in the instances where the likelihood is extremely low, or where it's really difficult to implement a control measure. You can use the risk assessment process, which looks at the likelihood versus the impact, things that you would have learned at level 5. And then the final stage is testing. And there are some control measures of an organisation that it can take that they're unique to IT systems, and testing is a common approach when it's used to ensure that an IT system and software will not fail when changes are made. So testing is really important. It's part of the operations of e-sourcing and e-procurement systems used in procurement and supply. And there are a number of ways systems can be tested. You can do unit testing, making sure that a computer program works as intended. Validation testing, to ensure that the type of data field a system uses is updated. And a volume test, which tests and assesses whether the system can cope with large amounts of data being inputted all at the same time. Disruption tolerance network is an effective way of ensuring connectivity is maintained and that data transfer is quick and uninterrupted. It uses a group of smaller networks that link together through connectors called nodes. So the nodes you can see on the diagram on the screen. The nodes can hold packages of data waiting for a connection for an onward transmission to be made. But a disruption tolerance network does not need a continuous path of connectivity between the transmission points and receiving points. It transfers the data as opportunities become available. And this is useful when data sources or transmission mechanisms is locating in a moving object, like a satellite or a vehicle. And the control measures should be in place as part of your data resilience strategy. The safety and security of networks is the development in network technology and software. That means that data can be stored in multiple locations. This significantly reduces the risk relating to natural or man-made disasters, like a fire or a flood. So many organisations decide to manage risks relating to data resilience by outsourcing their data storage and IT system hosting to a supplier who usually offers a cloud-based solution. But where hosting is outsourced to the cloud, the supplier is responsible for putting in place the measures to ensure data resilience. So at the sourcing stage, procurement team need to ensure that the supplier has appropriate data resilience strategies in place. And there are various standards that supplier can use to demonstrate compliance in this area. Now, a common way of managing risks of data disruption is to implement a process of system redundancy. The term was first used in engineering for situations where a machine was required to function without interruption to perform a key process or to guarantee safety. So an example of this would be an engine on a plane. System redundancy is simply a method of proving and providing more controls, capacity or safeguards than are actually needed to process or operate. But redundancy arrangements can be applied to data and hardware and software. So from a data perspective, it's having backup copies made in real time. Hardware, servers that can be used to replicate copies of systems and data, or software. So on the left-hand side, you have the basic form of system redundancy, when the process is where the backup copies of data are made. And for some systems, this copy is made in real time and sent over to a replica system that could immediately be used if the main version of the system failed. On the top right-hand side, in other instances, a snapshot copy of the data is made at the time when the system is not in use. So this could be at night, or known as the overnight save. So to use a snapshot of the data, a process to load this version onto the IT system would be required. And then the bottom right one identifies the complexity of an approach to system redundancy, in particular when considering data using a simple equation, diversity plus volume equals complexity. And the approach to business continuity of adding more and more diversity is likely to make the process more complex. Building complexity into the process may reduce the ability of an organisation to remove the risk of data disruption. Now, the Data Protection Act 2018 was put in place to bring UK law in line with the European General Data Protection Regs, the GDPR. It covers the processing of data at all stages of the data cycle, from acquisition, processing, reporting and storing, and that relates to living people and provides a way of individuals to have control over data about them. But it doesn't cover data held about organisation. It applies from the moment the data is acquired until the movement of it is returned, deleted or destroyed. Any organisation that holds personal data is required to comply with the Data Protection Act. This Act contains 8 principles. Data is fair and lawfully processed. Process for the use intended. Accuracy of data, and adequate in terms of relevant but not excessive. There's a retention, don't hold it any longer than is necessary. And process in line with the data subject rights. Keep the data secure. And data shouldn't be transferred to another country without any protection. And then finally, we're going to look at some international standards. Governments around the world have put in place measures to ensure organisations act to preserve data integrity and protect security. And by approving legislation, governments can oblige organisations to comply with the requirements that are set. So the regulations provide a way for governments to check compliance with the law without the need to take legal action. In this way, data integrity and security can be safeguarded and preserved. So the organisations themselves can act to preserve and protect the data. There are a number of international standards for data protection, and some of these are relevant to procurement and supply. Some cover the supply chain, while others relate to the areas that are covered by contracts. So the security risks in the supply chain is that many organisations have to deal with the risks relating to their supply chain on a daily basis. Whether it's the risk of data security or dealing with everyday issues or preventing theft. And in some countries, law enforcement agencies do not have the resources to prevent all the types of crime. While they might be equipped to deal with traditional crimes like theft, they don't have the skills or expertise to prevent or detect any cyber attacks or complex fraud. The ISO PAS 28000 security management system is about transporting goods from one part of the world to another, which can be really complex. And the risks that an organisation needs to manage can include theft, smuggling and terrorism. But there are also challenges of keeping products safe and preventing and preserving the integrity of a brand. That's the standard that covers the security management of the supply chain. It's a high-level approach that can be developed to help an organisation improve the security of their supply chain, and it uses the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. Now, managing the security of data can be challenging for an organisation. Now, while measures using new technology can be used to protect the data that an organisation holds, there may also be ways in which the data security can be breached. The threat of a breach can come from an individual who wishes to disrupt the organisational systems or the data that it holds. And that can result in disruption to an organisation's system or data, fraud through theft of money, data or information, or the destruction of systems or leaks of data through a cyber attack. And there are a number of risks relating to information security for the adoption of different technological solutions, such as cloud technology, data hosted by an external organisation. So you've got no direct ability to control the security. That means suppliers have to have a robust disaster recovery procedure in place. The other solution could be mobile devices. So you need authentication. That may not protect from unauthorized access if the device uses passwords rather than something biometric. And social media, maintaining compliance of people in all organizations with reputational impacts. The one on the bottom left is the ISO IEC 27001 and 2, which is to manage and protect information. And that's in response to the risks identified relating to information security. So this standard has been developed as a quality management standard that helps an organization protect its business critical data. It focuses on information security measures, although an organisation needs to undertake a process to demonstrate that it meets these standards. But it doesn't actually have to invest significant amounts in technology. But the purpose of it is to preserve elements such as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And then you've got the Trusted Computing Group. That was set up in 2003 and formed by companies which develop and sell computer hardware and software. Representatives of many of the major computing companies, including IBM and Cisco, as well as Microsoft, serve on the TCG board. Google is also represented at board level, but as an advisor. But the objective is to enable security and secure computing through the development of open standards and specifications. So again, a lot of their methods will be about authentication, user identity, machine identity, and network integrity. And then the payment card industry standards system. And one of the biggest risks of fraud an organisation faces relate to IT systems that deal with money transactions. So paying with a payment card or using a mobile device has become the norm for so many people. But a survey in 2018 showed that nearly 33% of Americans had not used cash in the previous week, and that percentage is set to increase. So making sure these electronic transactions are safe and not susceptible to fraud is therefore really, really important for organisations that take card payments for sales. E-commerce sites have payment, but by cash, of course, that's not an option. So the Payment Card Industry Standard Council was formed by the major credit card providers in 2006. Its aim was to produce and manage an industry data standard for security. There are 3 steps required to comply with the data security standards, such as assess, repair, and report. So by considering the Data Protection Act, this particular chapter basically explores the measures that governments can put in place to protect the integrity and security of data that organisations hold. These standards can also help transactional and customer data to keep that safe. And that's the end of this session. Thank you very much for watching.